Guys, welcome back to DeFi, degens, drip, and farm for poverty. Where on this channel, our vision is to empower the impoverished by helping you find financial freedom through crypto assets. Please subscribe and leave a comment and a thumbs up. Hey guys, welcome back. DeFi, degens, drip, and farm for poverty. So in today's video, we're going to discuss the common heard phrase of not your keys, not your coin, or not your crypto. We're not going to be specifically talking about Bitcoin. But we're talking about basically digital sovereignty, or what it means to actually own something, and looking at, do you actually own your crypto? And not only that, but do you own the money in your traditional fiat bank account, especially since that is the means in which most of us transact on a daily basis and exchange goods and services. But what this means for the future and where DeFi can be taking us. So I want to just give you some background to this, because we know this phrase. If you've been in crypto or DeFi space for a little while, you probably heard it, and most of us know it in reference to owning the private keys to your crypto, meaning if you have a ledger wallet, it's secure and it's not anywhere else for somebody to take it, or more specifically, owning the crypto itself and it's not on an exchange, especially a centralized exchange. So we saw earlier what happened when the Terra Luna crash came into the market. We saw how Voyager had to file for bankruptcy, Three Arrows Capital filed for bankruptcy, and Celsius filed for bankruptcy. And basically all these people that held crypto in those accounts, it becomes the owner of that crypto exchange, especially a centralized one, because they have to actually pay back the debt or whatever the case may be. And essentially what you're doing when you leave your crypto on an exchange is you are giving it to them. They are the custodian of your crypto. And that may sound harsh or whatever the case may be, but the fact of the matter is this has been the standard in the traditional banking world since banking got created. And I want to play a clip of that because I want you guys to understand how it's not just in crypto that this actually happens. This is actually the traditional fiat world as well. So I want you to ask yourself right now, if you probably never asked this question yourself, but do you own the money in your bank? Or who is the owner of that money? Is it you? Is it the bank? Is it both you and the bank? How does that work? And before you answer, or you can think about that answer, but I'm going to also play this clip from good old Pomp here on the Impact Theory podcast.
When you put money into a bank account, it's not your money anymore.
That's crazy.
Right? It's an IOU. They're supposed to give it back to you. But we've seen in very kind of outlier events, like in Cyprus in 2013, I think it was, where they basically come in and the government says, you know what? If you have $100 in the bank, we're taking $10, 10% tax across the board. Well, how can they take my money? Because it's not your money, right? And so you end up not understanding some of that. And so this idea of sovereignty, the ability to hold your assets yourself, right? You talked about you don't actually have money buried in the backyard, right? That would make you a sovereign individual. It also puts you at a lot of security risk, right? Somebody could come here and dig it up and harm you, etc. With Bitcoin, what it allows for is this sovereignty. You can actually hold on to it. Nobody else is holding it for you. You get to custody the asset. And so in the developed world, we don't think a lot about this, right? We just, I put money in the bank, I go to the ATM, I can take it out, I can swipe a card, no problem. In the developing world, this is a huge problem, right? If all of a sudden I need to get up and I need to flee Venezuela, for example, well, I have to get on a train, a plane, a boat, or walk. And at every single one of the ports, airports, train stations, or border crossings, what are they doing? They're confiscating people's wealth. And so there's, report after report after report over the last few years where somebody went to the airport and they had physical gold in their suitcase and the, government or the military took it from them. Well, you don't have sovereignty over the asset because you don't have the security of it. And so Bitcoin having this cryptographic kind of security to it ends up being really, really important on a global basis. Maybe not so much in the United States today, but globally really important. And the last thing is there's this censorship resistance with the payment network. And so one of the things that, again, in the developed world, we don't think a lot about is if I want to send you money, I basically have too many options, right? I can hand you physical cash. I can Venmo you. I one time asked my youngest brother how he sends money to his friends. He said Uber. I said, how do you send money on Uber? And he goes, well, I split rides with them at the end of the ride, right? So there's all these ways that we don't think that we send value back and forth to each other in the developed world. Well, what happens if the government said you can't send Tom money? And sometimes they do that, where they'll say, Tom's a criminal. You're not allowed to do financial transactions with him. I think generally as a society, we say there's got to be some rule of law. We agree bad people shouldn't be able to launder money or commit crimes with money, etc. But what happens if it goes from Tom's a criminal to Tom didn't work out today and Tom's been a bad boy in our society, and so now all of a sudden, Pomp, you can't send Tom any money? Well, what do we do then? Because all of the technology that we use would be exposed to that threat. And so this idea of censorship resistance, while I don't think most people around the world today are worried about their government saying Tom can't receive money because he didn't work out today, what we are worried about is, well, what happens when all of a sudden a dictatorship says to their citizens, you're not going to be able to get your capital out, right?
I'm actually a little more.
So this is actually quite chilling. So this interview, it's a couple months old now. This clipped out on August 18th, but it came from an interview, I want to say earlier this year, when he brought him on. Now, there's a bunch of things he brought up in this article, but the first, or in this interview. But first, it's the idea of the question I just posed to you: who owns your money? And actually, the bank 100% owns your money. When you give it to the bank, you're actually not depositing. You are giving the bank your money, and essentially you become the lender, and they owe you money, but they're under no like obligation, so to speak, to pay it back. They're supposed to, but as we saw with the bailouts, they can basically run out of money and then go, "Oops, sorry, I don't have it." So in this article, it says, as it happens, when you deposit your money in the bank, you're actually loaning the money to the bank, and the bank becomes the legal owner of it. And Professor Richard Werner, the economist who coined the term quantitative easing, if you've heard that being punted around, that is basically where they just print money out of thin air from the central bank. That's what they've been doing and causing inflation. But he said a deposit is not actually a deposit. It's not a bailment. It is not held in custody. At law, the word deposit is meaningless. Law courts in various judgments have made it very clear that if you give your money to a bank, even though it's called a deposit, this money is simply a loan to the bank. So you do not own your money. And like Pomp was talking about in that podcast, it's like, oh, well, that's only something that would happen in dictatorships or developing countries. Well, we can see that happening right now in a dictatorship in China, literally in real time right now. Within the last 3 months, China has frozen the assets of many of their citizens because they refused to pay back the money to Evergrande, who is supposed to be building houses, and basically the houses haven't been being built, and they were taking deposits on houses as a way to start building future ones. It's become some kind of a Ponzi basically in China, and the citizens have said, okay, well, we're not going to pay on this money, on these deposits, or on these houses being built. And the government has then in turn decided to say, okay, we're freezing your bank accounts. And that has led to protests. And then the protests led to more frozen bank accounts. And even in a way, like Pomp said, a dictatorship, how they actually now said, okay, not for people who haven't exercised, but they actually started using their social, I forgot what they call that, like way to identify what people's behaviors are doing. And they would actually flag some people as COVID positive, even though they weren't, if they found out that they were in this protest, and then they would court them off somewhere and quarantine them for 10 days just to get them to no longer be a part of this protest. So 400,000 customers were unable to access their savings accounts at rural banks. And there's one person here that said like they had millions of dollars, and for like the last couple of months, they weren't able to access it simply because they were actually participating in a protest. So nothing that would be considered illegal in other countries, but the government here decided, hey, we don't want you in this protest, and the only way to get you off the streets is to freeze your account. You're like, well, okay, well, that's just China. That's a dictatorship. That makes sense. Well, the exact same thing happened in Canada earlier this year with the protests there, a much more liberal, democratic country. Canadian bank accounts were frozen. And one lady in particular, because she was the kind of lead behind creating the campaign on GoFundMe to get money to these truckers that were basically protesting the vaccine. And then GoFundMe shut down the campaign. So again, the money is not owned by you. And even a website that is collecting the money on your behalf can just go ahead and turn it off because the government said so. So this is, happening right now in 2022. Now, another thing Pomp brought up in that podcast is what happens if you're trying to flee to another country. Well, we saw that with the Ukrainian war right now. And if you had money in that bank or whatever the case may be, you may not be able to take it out and run across the border. And there are legal ramifications for declaring or taking X amount of of actual fiat currency across borders. You have to actually claim a certain amount. For I know for US it's $10,000. It might be a global thing. If you have more than 10,000 USD equivalent, you are required to claim it, write it down, or whatever the case may be. And if you happen to have, say, like 100,000 that you're trying to take in a suitcase, you're going to probably get like detained at the airport, and then they can actually take that money from you, just like if you were taking a, gold bar or bricks or something like that. So that's crazy. So you don't actually own any of your money, and technically, it owns the government, and the banks own it, as well as whatever law enforcement comes across it and deems it confiscatable. They own it. But this also brought up the most recent thing that's happening, where Pomp mentioned, what after he says Tom wasn't exercising, and we decided we don't want you to interact with Tom. Well, if you've been following the news, it wasn't exercising, but it was Tornado Cash, where the OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets and Control, or something like that, decided to deem the Tornado Cash contract illegal, right? So if you're not familiar with Tornado Cash, basically it's a privacy tool that's been around for like 3 to 5 years, where people could send their money to it, and then it would just mix it with other transactions and then spit it out on the other end, so that your transaction would be anonymous. So it was primarily being used as an anonymity tool, but the U.S. Treasury Department, OFAC, said no, that's being used by North Korean government, and it's basically illegal funds and stuff like that, money laundering, right? So the truth of the matter is that only like 17% of it was quote unquote linked to money laundering, and the other 83% is for people legitimately using it to for anonymity and protecting themselves. Like Vitalik Buterin mentioned he used it to send money to refugees in Ukraine and stuff like that. So why I'm bringing this up is because since it has now been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department, they have sanctioned the actual code, meaning anyone who interacts with it is put on a blacklist, and therefore the that account and any of the funds associated with it are blacklisted as well. And the code itself can't be stopped because it's actually on the blockchain, but the interaction, like the UI and things of that nature, can be blocked. A citizen from Denmark was arrested because he was instrumental in writing the code. So it's a whole nother can of worms to talk about your rights and all that stuff. But the point I'm getting at is that since this has happened, oddly enough, movie stars, celebrities like Jimmy Fallon and Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong, and even Logan Paul, YouTuber, have been dusted with tainted funds from Tornado Cash. So technically, these people are now on the OFAC blacklist, and there's nothing to stop anyone from trolling or dusting wallets and then all of a sudden being blacklisted. And I think Brian Armstrong mentioned that for a short period of time, he had some problem with, accessing funds or doing something because of this just blatant blacklisting that the OFAC did with Tornado Cash. So all this I'm bringing up because the answer is in DeFi. So we can't stop central organizations from behaving the way that they behave, or from the control that they exhibit over our fiat currency, because by right, they created, especially the central banks, create the currency, and the government supports it. So technically it does belong to them. They get to do what they want. But that's where DeFi is so much more powerful, because it's created, one, by the communities, and two, controlled by the communities, and we get to dictate how we interact with it. So though we're not at a place yet where I can walk into my local coffee store and use Drip or AFP or Dogs to get coffee, we are seeing within our community how we can interact and transact with Drip and reward and incentivize people with Drip. Like, I can use it as part of an engagement campaign on my platform to get more people to engage on my content and pay them in Drip. You've seen some people like Bartertown use it to get contest designers or graphic designers to make stuff, and he pays them in Drip and sometimes BUSD as well. But the point is, the DeFi revolution is coming, and the community will dictate what adoption gets taken up by the masses. Now, right now, the biggest cryptos in that space as far as adoption are like meme coins, basically like Doge and Shiba Inu. And we've seen already some places like AMC use Doge as a form of accepting payment. and Elon Musk supporting Doge as well. So the point I'm getting at is that all of this stuff is already kind of happening, and the headwind or tailwind, so to speak, this tidal wave coming where DeFi and decentralized actual assets in itself will become part of the narrative that pushes massive adoption. Now, there's going to be tons of people that still would like to have the protection of centralized exchanges and all that stuff, but there's a lot of people that are going to be moving towards the decentralized nature. And again, looking at protocols like Drip that are completely decentralized on the blockchain. And the only way that things get changed is as us as a community decide to give Forex our tokens and allow him to rewrite a contract and then redeploy them back to the blockchain. So that's complete decentralized ownership. And we know that the animal farm is the same thing as well, where you're actually now earning yield on this. And the next step is where you do not have to exchange these assets for fiat currency. And you can actually use these crypto assets to exchange for real world goods and services. I don't know how long that mass market adoption will take, but you can see with things like Tornado Cash and the sanctions and the Canadian government freezing accounts and the Chinese government freezing accounts and how banks don't own your assets, the banks actually own your money. You can see how it's going to be pushing that way. And there are going to be tons of people getting orange pilled and waking up going, yo, I want to get out of this narrative. I want to be able to control my own destiny, so to speak. And us being at the precipice of this with the Drip and Animal Farm is just huge, huge, huge. So I hope you guys found this informative. I know a lot of you may not read the news and stuff like that. And I'm trying to just find a way to integrate that in my channel, show you the macro play as things move forward and how, again, we are super early and there's just going to be a tidal wave coming from all different sides of this industry and how you can prepare yourself for that right now. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe. We may pass the 2,000 mark. Let's go ahead and push to 3. And of course, No Sell August continues to go on. And my scavenger hunt campaign, another way to add utility to Drip, is coming soon. So until that time, lift daily and achieve your impossible. See you guys.